What's good, family? Welcome to the relaunch of the By the Hood podcast. We haven't been with you in a while because we've been out in the community doing the work, but we're bringing it back. And one of the reasons that we started doing this podcast or webcast is not just to talk to people and share that information, but also for us to learn as well. Salute to my brother Corey. He's not with us tonight. He's out, handling business, but I'm gonna hold it down. But like I said, we like to learn, so we like to invite guests on that teach us. We talk a lot about entrepreneurship and community building, and we have someone on who's not only a professor, he's an entrepreneur himself. He's a community activist, and I can attest to having seen him out in the field actually doing the work and not just behind the screen talking about it. And that's not a shot at anybody. But without further ado, I want to introduce my brother, Professor Carlton Jones. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, brother. I'm doing good, actually. How are you doing, brother?
Man,
How's the
listen,
brother?
I can't and I can't complain. But we like to make our shows fairly short just to introduce people to people in the community actually doing the work. So we want to get right into it. You're also a filmmaker, but let me just set the table by saying you're one of my favorite people online, and I'll tell you why. I have a lot of friends, follow a lot of people, and a lot of people talk about the problems of our community, but no one is really solutions based. And you're one of the only people. You're not the only one, but you're one of the only people that are you're solutions based. And whether I agree with some of your points or not, you make me think. So I want to start by saying for one, thank you, and for two, is that a conscious decision to be solutions based in a community where you see people argue over time about history, who's right, who's wrong. But a lot of people don't focus on solutions.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate you hearing that. That's encouraging. I hope most people, when they hear me talk or see something that I post on social media, get that point because my goal is to get us from this debate stage to the solution stage to considering it. And sometimes I'll post things on social media that I'm not even, it might not even be my point of view, but I know it's going to be thought provoking and it's going to pretty much generate or point people in a direction where you have to at least address the situation to come to a solution or at least consider the opportunity, the potential options. And, I think part of that is because I'm a person that's results oriented. I need to see the results. They need to be tangible. And I'm not, when I got my wake up call, in regards to waking up to being to Black consciousness and not just being Black consciousness, but the roles of a Black nationalist or Pan Africanist. One of the things I said was, I'm not in this to become famous. I'm not in this to become a star. I don't care if anybody notices me. In fact, the longer I'm in it, the more behind the scenes I want to become.
Mm-hmm.
But my goal is to have a liberated space for Black people that we can be productive in, a place that we can have our own resources, access to the resources, we create the resources, a place where we have institutions and schools. So the schools will feed the institutions will protect the schools. And to have that African-centered culture. And more importantly, once we get those things, to be able to protect it. So if all of my accomplishments today, if I died tomorrow, I would have died in a state of unrest. I would have transitioned to the state of unrest because my goal was not accomplished. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, everything that I talk about is solution oriented because at this point in the game, the clock is running out. You know what I'm saying, on us. And so we need to be solutions oriented because you don't want your enemy to determine what the solution should be for you.
Absolutely. And we tackle this from an economic standpoint. We like to teach personal finance and economics. But it's funny because in talking to some people, I feel like people fall in love with the struggle sometimes. Like they literally like enjoy the struggle where you try to talk about solutions and they don't want to talk about that. Like, do you find that in your work as well?
Brother. One of the reasons why I came, why and there were a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons why, I did the film The Independence Day Project was because I was talking to elders, people who have been involved in this struggle, if you call it, for 40 to 50 years. And they would always talk about it, being married to the struggle. And I looked at it from a perspective, if I had a job, I wouldn't want to work to my last days. I would the goal of the job is to work the job till you get to retirement stage, when the job is done. So that was one of the reasons. But yeah, every time I turn around, people are engaged, and I think we've fallen into that place of victimhood, where we draw our strength and energy from being victims.
Listen,
You
oh man, you hit the nail on the head, and that's a good segue into your the film that you pretty much did everything. You edited the film, you shot the film. You know, speaking of entrepreneurship, you stepped into that lane not just as a filmmaker, but as someone who put the whole project together. And it's funny you say that about like solutions. That's one of the things. One of the books I read that had a change in me when I was a young man was Powernomics by Dr. Claude Anderson.
Yeah, very good.
And the reason that book changed me is because, you know, after breaking everything down, he actually came with solutions. So that, like, you know, so that's always stuck with me. That's why I wanted to bring that up. But
before you go on, I just want to say something about Dr. Claude Anderson, because it's ironic that you say that, because I saw a video of his. Mm-hmm. That video that I saw him in Baltimore, where he just said Black people were in trouble. And when I saw it, that was a turning point for me.
Okay.
That's when I became more solutions oriented, because in looking at what he was talking about, he was addressing the fact that the clock is winding down on us. And if we address the situations now, you know, and he was speaking more so as you know, an angry integrationist. But even if he's just talking about building a independent Black community, the time was winding down. So Dr. Claude Anderson played a huge role in my transformation in terms of, you know, thought processing and things of that nature as well.
That's good to hear too. So speaking about the Independence Day project, like I said, you took on a role of everything: entrepreneur, a filmmaker. You did the whole thing, and it's an amazing body of work. And you know, I want to commend you on that. But there's a couple things that I took away from the film. I was actually watching your film, taking notes, which is interesting, because I watch a lot of documentaries, but all of them don't make me take notes, right? There was a sister in the film, and she said something that stuck with me. Because again, you know, from By the Hood, we talk about economic empowerment, owning our communities. And she talks about how everyone has a role. And she says, not everyone is meant to be a warrior. And that kind of stuck with me, right? Because I see people fighting all the time. You know, people come at me all day long. Oh, you talk about his money. I said, well, that's my role. Like, I feel like that's my part to play. I'm not the person out there marching. You know, everybody has their part to play. So, how do you feel about that when she says not everyone is meant to be a warrior? Some people have other parts to play in terms of us getting our independence.
Well, first of all, that was Carol Poole.
Okay.
And let me just tell you, she's one of the people who, when I thought of the concept of the Independence Day Project, she was one of the brain trust. She was one of the people who immediately understood and helped me develop the concept for the project. So I just want to take my hat off and commend her too, and especially her work with the great griot. Because she has her own videos, her own set of videos that she goes about. But that part struck me, because we seem to be, you know, it seems like everybody that does this work, for somebody on the outside, they look at us to wear all the hats. And when you look at nation building, if you really want to speak of it from the principle of nation building, well, nations have different departments. Nations have different parts, different functions of government. Nations have, you know, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Economics, the Department of Education, Department, Food and Drug Administration. I mean, nations have those things. They have ministries. And in our particular, mission, if you will, too many organizations or too many people try to be the end all be all, the solution bearer, with wearing all the hats, and you find that they never get traction. They get overworked. I mean, just doing what you do. And I want to commend you and Corey, because what people probably don't, well, your people probably know, but a lot of other people don't know, y'all go out and provide financial literacy for free. And if you charge, it's pennies on the dollar. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And so I want to commend you for that work, because that's the type of work we're talking about when we wear these different hats, and that's understand our skill. My skill, I'm a visionary, I'm a teacher. Don't ask me to handle the money. I'm trying. Don't ask me to handle the money. I wasn't gifted. I wasn't born with that gift. I'm learning, but I'm not. Some people's like Corey, for instance. You talk to Corey, he finds 6 different ways to make money in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
That's not my skill. You want to talk about, leading a military ranks or militia. I know a little bit about it through history, but that's not my area. But I will teach you. I'll teach the hell out of you, and I will show you, vision. And I'll help you to think outside the box.
Yeah.
So that part I think was very integral, because I think if people watch that, then they'll start to focus on being part of the bigger cause,
Yeah.
and handling the thing that they're the master at, instead of being the jack of all these other different trades.
Yeah, that's why that stuck with me, because that actually came with growth. Because I remember in the past, like, because I always wanted to help my people, right? So if someone didn't think the way that you thought, a lot of times when I was younger, I would get into heated debates. And at the end of the day, once you communicate with someone and you realize that we all have the same goal, right? But we're just attacking it from different angles. And as long as, we have the same goal, I mean, everybody has a part to play, like, back to yours. And that's why what she said stuck to me. Like, everyone's not meant to be a warrior. There's those that are meant to be a warrior, but everybody's not meant to be.
Right.
So that's one of the things that stuck out with me. You also talk about eco-sovereignty, food, clothing, and shelter. And I thought that was a very important piece. And for those who don't know what I'm speaking of, just to bring it back up, we're talking about the Independence Day Project. It's a film that was created, everything. Like I said, he took on the hat of an entrepreneur. He's selling himself short, saying that that's not a skill set. But when it comes to doing this project, you kind of had to do that, right? So,
oh yeah.
Talk about a little bit about eco sovereignty and how food, clothing, and shelter relates to that. And because a lot of us never talk about that piece. We never talk about that piece.
Yeah, well, you have to get the confidence of the people, and in order to get the confidence of the people, you have to control the things that they need. You have to be able to be the resource for the things that they need. So that's where the eco sovereignty comes into play, because it's sort of like that. We're tackling the hierarchy of needs, and that first level of hierarchy of needs is food, clothing, shelter, protection, security, things of that nature. Well, if you are not providing those things, you can't have a nation, because the nation itself stands on the principle that the people that are within that nation are protected by those who are governing them. And so when we speak about eco sovereignty, we're talking about actually taking control of our resources. We're talking about being the providers of food, the providers of shelter, the providers of clothes. That means we need to go out and get our own land. That means we need to be able to cultivate that land. That means we need to be able to pull and draw from the land and all the resources provided. So just like when you had I believe it was a rapper who went over in Africa and he partnered up with China, but they were able to pull away from the oil companies by creating solar power for several African countries. Well, then we should be able to use natural resources to create power in our communities, our designated communities that we take over and that we liberate. So we should be able to have a source, say, of solar energy, wind energy, if you want to use the water, the ocean, whatever, but be able to provide it off of the grid, so we provide those things for our people. We should be able to, like my good brothers down in Mississippi right now, and sisters down there, they're creating their own water right now. Wow. The Black Liberation Movement water, and it's alkaline 9.5 alkaline. Okay. And we're trying to get it up here, but we're trying to work that out. But it's the same, we're taking control of the resources, and therefore we're building the principles and the foundation for nation building. You can't build a nation in somewhere where you're still paying rent. It just won't work out like that.
And that resonated with me, because talking to people all the time who are entrepreneurs and try to start businesses, they want to start flashy businesses, but they don't think about controlling resources, or even things that are crucial to our day-to-day living. Like, even if you're not growing the food, that the actual concept of owning markets or owning gas stations, right? Those aren't flashy businesses. And I think it was Carter G. Woodson in the Miseducation of the Negro who talked about that. Like, there's certain things that we're going to use. We need to control those things. So that's why that part resonated with me in the film. Like I said,
it's amazing that you brought that up, because that's exactly why we spoke about that in the film, was the Dr. Carter G. Woodson's quote in terms of the arrogance of our business class and our bourgeois class when it came to being businessmen, wanting to wear shirts and ties and buildings, and not necessarily deal with what they considered, I forget what he called it, but the common man's business. Like, you needed the guy moving the barrel of ice down the street. He's dependent on every day. He doesn't have to come with a new concept. You need that ice every day, especially back then. You know, water the milk guy. You know, so yeah. That,
yeah. I'm telling you, Carter G. Woodson, man. Like, you know, and for those not paying attention, that's 2 powerful books we already given you so far. And I didn't even get to ask you about any books, but because there's so much as I want to get so much in within a short period of time, right? So I want to ask you about another concept from the film. And again, this is the Independence Day Project. And it's a powerful movie for a lot of reasons. Like, everybody who watches it may take something different from it, but from my vantage point of coming in from someone who talks economics, there's certain things that stuck out to me. So I took these notes. So another thing was the concept of planned shrinkage. I found that to be an interesting concept. I rewound that a couple times, you know. So could you explain to our listeners about planned shrinkage?
Yeah, planned shrinkage gentrification is what it's called. Planned shrinkage gentrification, and it's basically when you have developers and they decide to ostracize certain areas of the certain regions. And typically, what we find is they ostracize neighborhoods, communities, and even countries where Black people or people of African descent occupy. You can see this in Jamaica. You can see this in all places in the Caribbean, Central and South America, as well as various places in Africa, and as well as every neighborhood, every urban setting in this country. And what it is basically is you have a bunch of developers who link up with government industry, whether it's state, federal, or local government. And what they decide to do is they buy off properties in particular, and they buy them in clusters, or they sell them in clusters, and they collaborate to downgrade that community where you have vacant housing, you have poor street lights, infrastructure is breaking down. And one of the things that happens, the police patrols, they don't show up when crime occurs. You allow for crime to occur. And basically they downgrade the community and the livable spaces within that community. So if you have a community, let's just say you had a community with 100 units, well, by the time they're done, you might have 15 units of livable spaces. Meanwhile, everything around them is degraded. The houses, you have like I said, the vacant buildings. You have the infrastructure is breaking down. And they allow for that to happen until to the point where people are either kicked out, where you have to have people forcibly removed from those places. And then they bring redevelopment in. That's the austerity coming in. They bring redevelopment in and redevelop those areas like they tried to do with Detroit, like they did with Northern Liberties, like what they're doing currently right now in Kensington and Philadelphia, K&A, where they have the open drug market right now. With the opioid epidemic, where they're allowing, they basically have a tent city down there, Kensington, Allegheny, between Kensington, Allegheny, Kensington, and Cambria, and they have a whole park where people are just using up, and they're basically recultivating. They're allowing the livable spaces down there to shrink to the point where they can recultivate that and expand Northern Liberties.
Yeah. So that's interesting right there, because someone with a real estate background, I found that to be very interesting, because one of the things that we teach people is ownership. Mm-hmm. But it's not just ownership. And this is how everything ties together, which is why Powernomics is one of my go-to books, because even within ownership, you have to, as he says, use the economics to move to the next ladder, right? So even when you talk about politics and how politics plays a part in that planned shrinkage, one of the things that I've recognized in a lot of our areas that have been gentrified is that, a lot of the people who control the purse strings, so to speak, the politicians, are our own people.
Well, I wouldn't call them our own people.
all skin folk. Yeah, I get it. But I say that to say this: how do we go about holding them accountable for this? Right. So if you work to put, what you believe is your own people in, but, they're not even doing your bidding, which is why a lot of times they say, forget running a candidate, buy a candidate. I know a lot of people who actually believe that. Like, listen, people who have money, they buy politicians.
Yeah, Philadelphia 3.0 just bought some politicians. The answer to you, but I think you provided the answer already. The answer is, the economic pool. And us deciding to move as a unit, as a block. When you have other communities, they move as a block. They decide their votes as a block. They decide who they're going to fund as a block. They have their own lobbies. They write and draft their own laws and policies, and they take those to the politicians. So either they create the politician, or they let the politicians who need their votes, who needs their money, they let them know these are our stipulations. We're very wishful people. We vote for somebody and we wish and we're hoping that they stay true to us, loyal to us. We treat it like the streets, you know. You know what I'm saying? When we treat, politicians like, okay, we did you a solid, you got to do the solid back. And, they're going to learn, like in The Wire, it doesn't work like that. You have to be able to hold, like you said, hold the politicians accountable. How do you hold them accountable? Well, first of all, abstain from the process. If you abstain from the process, people say if you remove yourself from the process, first of all, they go back to this thing where our ancestors died for the right to. No, our ancestors died for us to be liberated people. Our ancestors didn't die for us to be mules, or as Malcolm X used to call us, suckers. I'm sorry, I'm saying.
Bring Malcolm up, because Malcolm talked about voting blocks. Like he's, and if you listen to a lot of his work, he talks about, like, if you don't vote in the block, you're pretty much wasting the vote.
Yeah.
But he talks about voting blocks, and so a lot of the answers our ancestors have given us,
right?
Which is funny, you know what I mean? So that's interesting that you bring that up. Another thing that spoke to me in your film, right, and from someone who has, like I said, a real estate and investment background, it doesn't matter what I personally accumulate, which is why I never really like to talk about my personal accomplishments in terms of that, because of this piece in your film talking about rugged individualism, right? So that's one of the reasons why we're in the community and we try to do things. But one of the things that we struggle with, to be honest with you, is getting people to pool resources and work as a collective when it comes to economics. Myself and Corey can go do deals all day long, but we understand that it's only so much we can do as individuals unless we find a collective to work with. And you talk about this in the film, how rugged individualism leaves us powerless. So can you explain to the listeners out there, what is rugged individualism and how does it leave us powerless?
Well, rugged individualism is a real simple concept, bro. Is basically, I'm doing for me, and I'm going to use whatever resources you provide to build my own capital, and I might provide for me and my family, but I really don't care about pouring back in or paying it forward to the next generation, and I'm not community bound. Now, one of the things we talk about in the movie more so is in every aspect of the 9 areas of human activity that we address, we talk about the culture, because we want to bring it back to the culture. We need to become more African-centered in our culture, because if we become more African-centered in our culture, one of the things, and we speak about, one of the principles of Kwanzaa is cooperation. You know what I'm saying? It's talking about, economic cooperation. And so we want to bring all that back. You know what I'm saying? We want to get that African-centered culture to the point where people are looking at each other, and it's not my dollar, my $1 doesn't matter. But if I got 5,000 friends and we have $1 and we have a committed goal or committed purpose that's going to benefit not just us, but the community and future generations to come, then we're not even, it's just going to be second nature. You go to the Jewish community. One of the things they did in Brooklyn, which was freaking amazing, and Bed-Stuy, where Biggie used to live, by the way, they re-gentrified Bed-Stuy in Bedford-Stuyvesant. And one of the things they did was you had some real estate investors who bought out the buildings, because New York was going from rent controlled to they were removing the rent controls for the properties. So what they did was they went out and bought buildings, and then they would advertise for Section 8. They made them Section 8 available. They would advertise them in their newspapers, but the newspapers weren't written in English. They were written in Yiddish. So if you could understand Yiddish, you didn't know that it was a Section 8 building right here. You see what I'm saying? So they were able to make all their money back and still provide rent control for their community. That's thinking as a community. Rugged individualism, one of us would have bought that building, and we might have said, yeah, we're want to, make it Section 8, but we wouldn't have done it in a way that provided or benefited Black people. We would have done it in a way we provide for ourselves. With, you'll see a picture of me in a swimming pool somewhere talking about you can be like me. You know what I'm saying? But we wouldn't be necessarily doing it.
And that,
benefited from it. And it's done as a collective.
Yeah, that's and it's another book, by the way, I want to bring up. It's a book called The Jewish Phenomenon, right? Which speaks a lot to how they move as a unit. And what's interesting is they talk about how they move as a unit without necessarily having to have a leader.
Yeah.
And I know you talk about this all the time. I actually watched one of your lectures before, and in your lecture, you asked everybody in the audience, who's the leader of the Jewish community? And they're like, I don't know. Who's the leader of the white community? Who's the leader of the Asian community? And no one had any answers. But you said, who's the leader of the Black community? You heard Farrakhan, Al Sharpton, Jesse, and no shots to any of them. But the fact of the matter is, we're the only community where people can just readily point to who our leaders are. We're never on code, which is kind of what you're speaking to. In that book, The Jewish Phenomenon, which is a pretty good book, talks about how they move without even having to say a word. Like there is one without even having to meet with each other. So that's another book I want to bring up, which is a powerful book. Speaking of that lecture, though, something else I found interesting. You were saying some very powerful things, and there was one white lady in the audience, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I was reading the comments on this because I'm one of these people on YouTube who read comments, and everybody was like, "Oh, she must feel uncomfortable. She must feel uncomfortable." And you chimed in and said, "The funny thing is, she's the only person who asked me to come speak to her class. She's a teacher or something."
Yeah.
And that leads me to the idea of doing this work, putting yourself on the front line, being an entrepreneur, being an educator, and the support you get from your people. Is that getting any better at this point? Like, how is that working out? Is it getting any better, or do you still find that to be a pain point within the work that you're doing?
I'll be honest with you. That's probably the most disparaging part of this, is the fact that when you do the work, people will cheer you on, they'll clap, but they won't really support you. And you know what I'm saying, that's probably one of the most disappointing things. So I have to go back to the successes, to sort of recharge me, to see the elders who I know put in work, and also look at the babies, because this generation, for some strange reason, I might want to just say this generation, but our community does not see this work as being fundamental. So when I talk to teachers all the time, I worked at a school where the people from that school branched out, and now they're teaching all over the city. Not one of them have ever invited me into their classroom. And the irony behind that is, when a crisis comes up, then my phone rings off the hook. When there's a situation where children need to be reached, or a community issue that needs to be addressed, that's when they decide. So we're sort of like, and as somebody said before, the warrior is not revered until the warrior is needed. And so we sort of have to take on the mantle and understand that the community itself is, first of all, we understand our community is sick. And the stuff we're talking about doing, the medicine don't taste good. You know what I'm saying? To tell people that if you really want to cure yourself or stop police brutality, if you really want to stop, well, we call it police terrorism, if you really want to stop a situation where we have so many broken homes, then there's certain things you want to sacrifice. And they're saying, no, we don't want to sacrifice the heroin. We don't want to sacrifice the crack. I mean, we don't want to sacrifice the electronics. We don't want to sacrifice the fancy clothes. We don't want to sacrifice these different the happy hours at the bar. We don't want to sacrifice, going to the movies and getting lost in the comic book, theatrical, display. We don't want to do those things. And then but when the crisis comes up, then it's like, where you guys at? Like, I'll never forget the day that Trump got elected, how many people I knew that were so shook they were talking about leaving the country. And my phone rang off the hook for about 2 weeks. I had to talk them off the bridge. I had to talk them off the ledge. Like, it's not going to be that bad. We survived the Obama administration, which had more unarmed Black people killed by cops than police that by police than were lynched in the 1920s at the height of the lynching season. We'll survive Trump.
Yeah, we'll survive. We always will. We're survivors, and I know certain areas that look like and there's a meme out there. It looks the same under Trump, the same under Bush, the same under Obama. So
Yeah,
so we got to save ourselves. This is what it boils down to.
that is the most powerful thing I think that to come up. We have to save ourselves. In the Independence Day Project, we asked 2 questions. What does an independent Black community look like free of white supremacy, free of white domination? And then what do we have to do to build it? We don't ask for no help from the white man. We don't ask for reparations. I'm not saying we don't deserve reparations, but let's face it, unless you can hold them accountable and force them to give it to them, they're never going to give us reparations. So when we start talking about doing things, the Independence Day Project is about us taking our power and showing that these are viable solutions. We can do this. I don't want you to be fed up and drunk off of history and feel good stories and lessons and things of that nature. We've done all that, and thank God for that. I'm appreciative of all the projects. I'm appreciative to people like Tariq Nasheed, who showed us that this is a way to counter propaganda effectively, through documented, through the documentary form. And I'm appreciative of that. But we've done all that now. We there's no more stones that need to be unturned to talk about our influence or histories, derelict memories to us. Now let's talk about fixing these things for us. Let's talk about building for us, because if we don't continue to move in that direction, brother, I saw the vision for the Independence Day Project. I also saw the vision for what happens if we don't deal with what's happening to us now.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, and salute to Todd Millionaires, another brother who does a podcast about Black business. And I saw a message he put out today. He said, if reparations comes, I'll take it, but in the meantime, I got to build. Like, meantime, we got to build. Like, we can't sit around and wait on that. We got to build. If it comes, it comes. But if not, we got to build anyway. So, yeah. Before we get you out of here, though, man, you are the professor. So I got to ask you this. I'm a lover of books. We brought up several good books throughout this podcast. But what are some books? Just give me a couple. Give me like 3 books that changed your life or gave you some insight to lead you to be the person that you are today.
Well, it's funny, right? Because I'm looking around my book collection right now, but it's some books that it's not even about. It's some books that weren't even ours, like The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, like, and that's this. Let me see if I can pull it. Try to make sure I got the right one. There we go. The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America.
Okay.
And this is written by a woman by the name of Charlotte Isabite. Now, this book talks about, how the system of education was deliberately, designed to create, a permanent working class. So when you filter through these books, you start to read and you start to dissect. They're talking classism, but I see the racism inside of it, and I see how this thing, when you combine it with what Dr. Carter G. Woodson was talking about, then you start to, add on the pieces. I'm a person that fills in the blanks and puts the pieces of the puzzle together. You know what I'm saying? So, that's one book in particular. I mean, you mentioned some of my favorite books.
Yeah, I know you can give me a ton of them. I was just saying, just give me like 3 ones that you may have heard of, may not have heard of.
But there was a book that sort of turned me around a long time ago, and it was Make Me Want to Holler by Nathan McCall.
Okay.
So and Nathan McCall, basically talked about his transformation into Blackness, into Black consciousness, and he had dealt with several situations. He grew up in the DC area, and he talked about his breakthrough, and he became a journalist for the Washington Post. And he talked about how he had to go through the racism in order to get there. Now there's one, several. I mean, you can talk about the compensatory code book, is written by Elder Neely Fuller, which he was the Jegna to. That's another term we brought up in the movie, Jegna. He was the Jegna to Dr. Francis Cress Welsing.
Okay.
Understanding what racism and white supremacy was. So, we got that book. There's another book though that many people probably don't recognize in this a book that was just called Kaffir Boy.
I'm familiar with it. I'm familiar.
Yeah.
I haven't read it yet, but I actually have it in my list. I already have the book. I purchased the book. It's on my list of books that I'm getting to.
Mhm.
And I want to bring up because you brought up Nathan McCall. I actually read that book years ago. But just for the listeners out there, anybody that follows me, I'm always talking about books. One of the things that I recognize also is going back and rereading books at
Mhm.
different points in my life. And I think I'm going to go back and read that now and see how I take in the information now that I have more information, because that's what's interesting about it. Because I've read The Miseducation Negro so many times, and
Mhm.
each time I read it, I'm at a different point in life, and I'm taking something different from the book.
Mhm.
And there's several books like that. So just want to bring that up as you mentioned Nathan McCall, because I was like, damn, I'm gonna go back and read that again. More.
Yeah, that same thing happened with me. I think I've read the book 4 or 5 times. I've given it away 4 or 5 times. I rebought the book 4 or 5 times because it's just you learn something different every time,
Yeah.
a different piece. And with Kaffir Boy, written by a brother named Mark Mathabane, he was a South African, and Kaffir is akin to the word to the N word here.
Mhm.
And African was Afrikaans or whatever, and talking about their struggles in Africa. And the thing I think is interesting about reading that book and why I brought it up is because if you look at the gentrified cities and the gentrified situation we're dealing with now, the areas in America are starting to mimic the conditions of apartheid, South Africa, prior to, the removal of apartheid, where they had the color and caste system, and the closer you got to the metropolitan area, the business district, the inner circles of the city, the whiter it got. And
Yeah.
you had to show your passes and you had to show ID to get from one place to another. And now we're starting to see that, they're redlining here, like, openly redlining to the point where if you are not supposed to be in certain areas, the cavalry will show up and now you got to show them your license and registration. They don't even ask you for your registration no more. They just ask you for your driver's license. It happened
Yeah.
to me one time. So, so those are some of the books. I mean, like I said, and look,
Yeah.
I'm
And
never.
I know you're a professor, so anytime you ask a professor about books that can go on, but
Well, no, I want to say this part. I
you
want to say
answered my question because you gave a couple books that, like, I'm going to go back. Like the first book you showed, I've never read that. I've never even heard of that book, but I'm adding that to my list tonight. Like, because as our brother Kill says, read or die. Like, you
mhm.
know, I'm all about that reading life. So that's exactly why I asked you that question. I knew you would bring up something that's not one of the more popular books. So
Oh yeah, well, the the thing is, I have so many books that I've yet to read that I plan on reading. You know,
yeah,
and
same here.
that's the one thing I want to say is I'm not a know-all. I don't have all the answers. Um, one book that I read and I'm reading and I'm trying to get more of, and it's the Blueprint for Black Power by Amos Wilson.
Okay.
And you know, reading that book. I'm also currently reading, one of the books from, I'm reading a book called Warrior. You know what I'm saying? And right now, do I have one of those copies? I'm trying to think if I have a copy of it up here. But no,
And,
it's
and
in my
speaking
process. But um,
And
but
speaking of plant shrinkage and gentrification, a book that I want to bring up also is The Color of Law. So for those listening, read The Color of Law, and especially for my people out there in real estate, it will give you a different perspective. It talks about how our communities were basically made and the laws that were used to put us in the conditions that are some of our communities are. So that's a powerful book right there.
mhm.
Nothing happens by accident. Let's put it that way. And The Color of Law pretty much breaks that down. Goes into redlining. It goes into racism in the mortgage industry. It goes into a lot of things, but it gives you facts, data, and can't argue with a lot of that. So The Color of Law is another pretty good book. But I want to keep you at number because we could talk all night, Professor. But I just want to say thank you first and foremost for coming on this podcast, for sharing your knowledge. And also the Independence Day Project. How can people get a hold of your film?
They can go to my website, blackindependence.org. That's blackindependence.org. And they can also find me on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, not so much on Twitter, but
Yeah.
and if they just Google my name, Carl Tone Jones, there's something very unique about my name. It's the only Carl Tone Jones on all of the internet, anywhere, is in all of cyberspace. I'm the only Carl Tone Jones. So if you not
And
so
listen, man,
not Carlton, but it is Carl Tone Jones. If you Google my name, you'll be able to contact me. All my contact information is right there. And I just really appreciate you bringing me on the broadcast, brother. I really love and respect the work y'all do. I mean, I brought you guys into my classroom. I will be
yeah,
bringing you back into my classroom. Um, every time, the students, they love, the message and the information they got from you and Corey. So,
we
and I
appreciate it, man.
appreciate y'all coming out that day.
And I want to make you a promise, and also our listeners out there, because I'm this film, like, was so powerful to me that I'm going to meet up with Professor Tone. I'm going to purchase 5 copies myself. And for anyone who, like, gives me some feedback after listening to this episode, I'm going to send it to you for free. 5 people. The first 5 people to say, hey, anything about it, I'm going to meet up with Brother Tone, get 5 myself, and I'll give them away, man, because I believe in the work that much. And also, are you working on another one or what?
Oh
What's going on?
yeah. I had to take some time off because that first one almost, it did some work to me.
I understand that. I understand that, man. I can only imagine, like, the editing piece had to be brutal. Had to be
Brother,
brutal.
editing piece, doing the soundtrack,
Yeah,
making
yeah,
beats.
yeah. You learned a lot in the process, right?
Yeah, I'm in the wilderness doing things I'd never done before. So a lot of things you see on the film, it's like I did that for the first time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but we are working. We're working right now on part two. See, the first film was Division. Now
Mhm.
this is the second film is practical application.
Okay.
So we might have given you some solutions in the first film, but we're going to show you the solutions in progress in the second film. To show we ain't just talking about building, this nation that we keep speaking on. We're actually out in the field doing it. We're actually out there with the crops. We're actually out there with the
You know what's
industry.
crazy? All right, and I said I was getting out of here, but I had to bring it up based on that point, right? Because you hear all the time when people say, what about black on black crime, or nobody does this, but there are people out there doing the work, and you document the everyday person, not necessarily, the celebrities that like to get on documentaries and because they're celebrities, but you document a lot of the people who are out there doing the work. That, like, pisses me off when I hear people say no one cares when this happens. Oh, absolutely they do. There are people out there doing the work. Corey and I just spoke at a prison, and it was a bunch of brothers there, like pouring into people, and I was sitting there like, there's no cameras here, but like it's not just us. I'm talking about, it may have been 20 brothers that were there, like, getting knowledge and information and trying to pull each other up. So, and you document that, which is a good thing. So speaking of part two, you're talking about practical application and showing people actually doing things, because people are out there putting in work, and
Yes,
I
sir.
think it's important that those things are documented. So, salute to you for that as well.
Hey, brother, we do it, and the thing is, we do it from a different place. We do it from a place of passion. We do it from a love for our people, and we also do it from the fact that we recognize the necessity for the work that needs to be done. That we recognize the urgency, and we also recognize that there are, like you said, there are brothers and sisters all over the planet. And this time, with the Independence Day Project, we hope to take it international. So, this project, it'll probably, we're probably looking at maybe February of next year, because we
Okay.
plan even going to Africa and doing some
Oh,
filming in Africa.
nice, nice,
Yeah, yeah, we're
nice.
planning on doing some real work, some more, expansive, and show how we're not just doing this here, for American Black people. We're doing this for the whole diaspora, so that they can see, so they can build up, and that we need to link up and network. And it's happening. And I have an elder by the name Dr. Murphy. And one of the things he talks about is um, we don't we're not as much. Um, I forget what he said, but disjointed. We're just disconnected.
Yeah.
Oh, we're people doing the work. We're just not connected to all the people doing the work.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
Baba Mawali Baruti actually takes the Independence Day project, and that was his book I was talking about earlier with the Warriors that I've been reading. Um, and he talks about building. Well, he actually uses the book as the instrumental tool. I mean, the
Okay.
movie. So the Independence Day project now is shown in his school in Atlanta as required learning. So,
Nice.
I mean, plenty of things, and there's one more. It's one more book I want to speak on too. My brother, IJ Tyamba has a book out, and it talks about the student organizations. So, but it's real good because it talks about how to organize within your community and give you a lot of good steps in organization. So, you know what I'm saying, brother. And listen, let's not forget your book.
Absolutely, absolutely. Own your time and space, right? And
own your time, because that book right there is a diamond.
I appreciate that, man. And
let's not forget your book. So
we have a couple schools using our book as well, and that was humbling too to have teachers reach out and say, "Man, we're using your book in the school." So I know that feeling. That's a humbling feeling, man.
Yes, sir.
But Professor Carlton, again, man, I just want to say thank you, man. Because like I said, we can go on all night talking about these books, but I just want to say thank you for your time. And we'll get you back on here closer to when the next film project comes out. And like I said, I'm going to be picking up those copies. I'll be getting with you soon, and getting those copies. I want to make sure we get these films out there in the hands of the people, man. And it's an amazing project. And just salute to you for all the work you do. Because I know sometimes it can be frustrating, but a lot of us appreciate what you do, good brother.
I appreciate you, brother, and I appreciate the work you do. And I get motivated when I see you working. So
absolutely. I appreciate that.
Salute to you, good brother, and nothing but gratitude and love, because I know how real you brothers are when it comes to doing this work. I know the struggles y'all deal with that y'all talk about. I'm like an open book. Somebody say what's wrong, I'm gonna tell you. And a lot of unfortunately, I see a lot of brothers like y'all. It's all right. It's all right. I'm like, no, it's not all right.
Yeah.
One quick thing, man. Before we go, I just want to give a shout out to the Move family.
Okay.
Welcome home, Janine and Janet Africa. This past week did the press conference yesterday. I'm rocking the Never Give Up on the Move shirt. I want people to know that. Mama Ramona is having her 60, I believe it's a 63rd birthday. This upcoming Saturday. So shout out to the Move and the Africa family. Much love and respect. I'm saying work diligently with them on a lot of different things, but it's just good to see that they get the results, because that's that. You talking about another book, and I can't reach it, but they talk about John Africa and his message, and how that message persevered and helped them persevere through torture as political prisoners in jail. It's different than being a prisoner in jail. When you're a political prisoner, people send henchmen in for you, and they send henchmen in not just for men, but for the women as well. So that's that spirit we're talking about, that you can't kill us, man. We're going to keep fighting. And when I see that, how can I give up? How can I fall off?
Absolutely, man. That's powerful words right there. Let's end right there. But listen, man, thank everybody for tuning in to the relaunch of this Bodyhood podcast. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We are there. Make sure to share this content, and please give us feedback. We're going to keep pushing out this content and get people on that we can learn from, as well as you can learn from. Don't forget Independence Day Project. Make sure you check that out. I'll put the link in the description. And pick up our book, Own Your Time and Space, at ownyourtimeandspace.com. So until next time, everybody, listen, remember, it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. So keep the work up out there, people. Game elevates, and peace.